It's my pleasure to introduce Carol Reardon. Carol is the George Winfield Professor of American History at Penn State University. She is, as most of you know, one of the nation's leading military historians. She is the author of 5 books, including Pickett's Charge in History and Memory. She is recently published with the University of North Carolina, With a Sword in One Hand and Jomini in the Other, and then most recently, a new field guide to the Battle of Gettysburg. She co-authored that with Tom Bosler. Carol was a mentor of mine back at Penn State. She served on my master's committee, and here's a friend and colleague and also a neighbor. We live very close to each other in Gettysburg. We trade power tools all the time. We talk about mulch. What's your favorite mulch? It's pine. So this morning, Carol is going to talk about George Gordon Meade, how he transitioned from Corps Command to Army Command in June of 1863. Please welcome Carol Reardon.
You know the drill by now, right? Good morning, everybody. You're almost good as the War College crowd I spoke to the other night. You just said good morning. They responded with good evening, ma'am. Just one of those things that you, well, I sort of have a problem with it, even after all these years hanging around with Carlisle Barracks. I want to talk to you today about General George Gordon Meade. I heard an awful lot of Meade questions coming after the Lee talk, so let's just sort of stay on task here and just keep talking about the Union commander, since he's usually the one we know a little bit less about. You'll notice the title, A Much Fuller Plate. On the night of the 27th of June, 1863, when General Meade entered his tent and lay down for a few hours of restful sleep, he commanded the Union Army's 5th Corps and a little over 10,000 men. The next morning when he comes out of that tent, probably still in a state of shock, he now commands over 94,000 men, almost 10 times what he commanded when he went to bed the night before. How do you make that jump intellectually? How do you make that jump as far as prioritizing what is important today that might not have been nearly as important yesterday? You have a learning curve that is in front of you that is about as steep as you can possibly imagine. The answer is not, if I have 10 times more troops, I just work 10 times harder. That just won't quite cut it. You really have to rethink your situation. Today, in the modern United States Army, before an officer takes on the next level of command, in many cases there is actually a pre-command course that you can go to that will give you the basics, that will help you realign your priorities, that will help you learn your new job before you actually have to do it. Now, General Meade is not going to have that luxury. Actually, no Civil War soldier had that luxury. But for him, the learning curve was steep, and the time available to master it was almost non-existent. So we have to take a look at General Meade and what he has to face. But there is a second piece to this as well, and that piece is to look at the Army that he is going to now command. We have to take a look at how it adapts to change. How well does it adjust from shifting from one commander to another? How stable is the organization? How effective will that organization remain during change happening at a very, very intense time with a lot of rapidly developing situations? So these 2 days, these 3 days, the 28th, the 29th, the 30th of June, 1863, actually tell us a whole lot about General Meade, but also tells us a great deal about the Army of the Potomac. And that's a pretty interesting combination to keep in mind. Most of us pretty much know the story. It begins with General Joseph Hooker. He who had been defeated at Chancellorsville, he who is now confronting the Army of Northern Virginia, which has moved north into Pennsylvania, which is wreaking havoc here in the Keystone State. And he's trying to figure out what it is he is supposed to be doing. We usually have a portrayal of General Hooker as a bit of a whiner. I don't have enough troops. I don't have enough supplies. I don't have enough this. I don't have enough that. We can almost put it to music and dance to it. It's just that kind of a situation. Well, if he gets these things and if he has a track record for winning, you can perhaps forgive him. But he's lost to Chancellorsville. He's let Lee get ahead of him. He doesn't seem to have a whole lot of confidence in himself. He always seems to have somebody else to blame. There is going to be a point when the commander-in-chief decides enough is enough. On the 27th of June, General Hooker is going to send a message to General Hancock. I'm unable to comply with the means at my disposal and earnestly request that I might at once be relieved. When he sent that message, it was 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It was logged in at the War Department at 3 in the afternoon. At 8 in the evening, General Hallux will send him a message saying, I am not the one who can act on this because you served at the pleasure of the President through the Secretary of War. They will have to address your request. The letter of relief that will remove General Hooker from command is still dated the 27th of June. That is just about as quick a turnaround as we've ever seen a decision be made in the highest levels of government. He was out of there. Hooker wants that? Sure, no problem. When you're looking for government responsiveness, that may be one of the #1 opportunities right there. But of course the question comes, if not him, who? Well, the man who's going to get the visit, of course, is General Meade. Most of us in this room, just because a lot of you have been coming here a long time, and you hang around this place, this town so much, you already know a lot of the basics. That he was born in Spain, of Philadelphia parents, that he considered himself a Pennsylvanian, a Philadelphian, that he graduated from the United States Military Academy in 1835, graduating 19th out of the class of 56. That he served for a few years and then he left service, but then returned to service in the early 1840s. He saw a little bit of service in the Mexican War, but spent most of his time in the Corps of Topographical Engineers. And he becomes Mr. Lighthouse. You need a lighthouse, this is the guy you want to build it for you. When the war broke out in 1861, he was a captain. He was a pretty old captain, but then again, most captains at the outbreak of the war were pretty old captains. He is going to become very much, he's going to catch the eye of Pennsylvania Governor Andrew Curtin. He will be connected with the Pennsylvania Reserves. He will go through brigade, division, and corps command. He will be wounded during the 7 days battle at the Battle of Glendale. He will be hit by a bullet in the arm and in the side. And the bullet that hit him in the side hit him at such an angle that it sort of grazed his 9th rib, as one report had it, and came out his back. The fact that there was a wound that included back in the description of it always made him a little nervous because he did not want somebody to just sort of hear it and casually say, General Meade was shot in the back. That carried connotations that bothered him a great deal. And so he does have a bit of an ego. He is very careful about his reputation. But most often when he vents these concerns, he vents them to his wife. If you do not have the copy of the 2 volumes of General Meade's wartime correspondence, includes Mexican War and Civil War, you might want to make that an addition to your library because it really will take you inside the head of one of our senior commanders. You can tell that his wife, Margaret Sargent, the Sergeants of Philadelphia, was his venting place, his safe place. He told her a lot. It really does provide some insight. And that is where we get the interesting story of how General Meade now found out that his world was caving in around him. It was about 3 in the morning. He was sound asleep. Somebody came into his tent. It was Colonel James Hardie from the Secretary of War's staff. According to at least one account that was published in Battles and Leaders, Colonel Hardie showed up in civilian garb. I've seen others that say he showed up in the full dress uniform of a colonel and really looked the part. But there was this account that he showed up in civilian clothing because he had to come from Washington to Frederick, Maryland. And this was about the time, or shortly after the time, that Jeb Stuart's cavalry had gone through the area, and there was great concern for what might happen to a small group of men wearing Union blue traveling in that dangerous country. Well, in uniform or in civilian clothes, all of a sudden Colonel Hardie is standing in General Meade's tent and shaking him awake. As General Meade told his wife the very next day, yesterday morning at 3 a.m., I was aroused from my sleep by an officer from Washington saying he had come to give me trouble. At first, I thought that it was either to relieve or arrest me, and I promptly replied to him that my conscience was clear, void of offense towards any man. Probably when he found out why Colonel Hardie was there, he probably would have preferred to be arrested, given what the message was. It's just one of those things. Command of the Army of the Potomac has not been a successful next step to anything. It's been a revolving door. If you're looking for job security, Commander of the Army of the Potomac is not your first choice of jobs that you might want to be seeking. But all of a sudden, the gig was his. In the morning, when he got up and got dressed, he knew what he had to do next. And Colonel Hardie was there and remained there to make sure that the transition from Hooker to Meade happened as planned. In fact, he sent a message back to General Hallux, and it has one of those secretive tones that's always kind of interesting. General, I have accomplished my mission. Well, at his headquarters, General Hooker immediately understood the import when General Meade and Colonel Hardie appeared at his tent early in the morning. He probably marveled at the fact that the decision had been made so quickly, and he got out of the way fairly quickly. In fact, probably a bit too quickly. When General Meade took command, when Colonel Hardie informed him of his new position, he also came with a letter from General Hallux. And General Halleck's message made 4 important points. The first important point was simply, you will not be interfered with. Now, compared to what General Hooker had just been through, this was probably some of the best news that you can receive. I can fight my fight, I can do what I need to do without constantly checking in or checking back. It was a vote of confidence, and he recognized that. And he probably thought it was a rather amazing thing, since he had had no personal interview with Hallux. He would not have a chance for a personal interview with the president. They were simply going to trust him to do his best professional job and not try to interfere with what his plans were. The second thing they said was, Hallux said to me, was that all forces are subject to your command, including the troops at Harper's Ferry. And very soon thereafter, in fact, later on the 28th, the forces in the Department of the Susquehanna, gathering up at Harrisburg under General Couch, will also be put at Meade's service should he require them. It might seem like Meade is just really being handed presents right and left. You need Harper's Ferry's troops, about 3,000 or so, you got them. You need whatever General Couch is putting together, you got them. There can be a point when you are overwhelmed with riches, however. General Meade still has to make the transition from commanding 10,000 to the 94,000 men in the Army of the Potomac. It's going to take a little bit more adjustment to think about, well, what else do I have to play with? He almost has not just a much fuller plate, but an overflowing plate, and he has to master chunks of it at a time. But at least he knows he has that option, which is something that General Hooker didn't have. A third point that Hallux made in his message to General Meade was simply, You have the authority to relieve officers you wish to relieve and to appoint those whom you wish to appoint, and we will not interfere with those appointments. Now that's something that a senior officer just thinks is a wonderful opportunity. It's important for a general up on these levels to form their own team. It's nice if you're able to hold interviews. It's nice if you have an extended period. It's nice if you can sit back and reflect upon the great talent pool that you have surrounding you and identify those who possess specific skill sets that you need, but also are people who you know and professionally trust. Trust is huge here. The other night, I gave a talk up at the U.S. Army Military History Institute, the Army Heritage and Education Center, as we call it now. And one of the things I like to do anytime I go up there is simply walk around and take a look at the various artwork, the various posters, the various hangings on the wall. And one of them was a series, it looked like a giant archway. And what we saw in there were some of the obligations of a professional soldier, especially a professional officer, to cultivate your professionalism, to be confident in your skill set and all that. The keystone that held it all together simply had one word on it, and that one word, trust. That's what really made the Army work up on that level. You had to have that kind of trust. So being given the authority to remove those in whom you might not have that level of trust or hadn't yet developed it, it doesn't have to be a negative, I don't trust you. It can also be, I don't know you well enough yet. And replace it with this key time with people who he trusts, that's an awfully big thing. The last point that Hallux made in his letter to Meade was to give him his mission. Meade will not have to sit down and think about, what is my job here? What are my priorities? He won't have to come up with a commander's intent because basically General Hallux will give it to him. He is told, cover Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. If Lee advances toward these areas, meet him and fight him before he gets here. Much of the tone in what Hallux says to Meade is defensive in nature. Watch out for Baltimore. Watch out for Washington, D.C. It's not, when you first read it and read the words that Hallux uses, you don't think offensive in the first reading. You think defensive. There are some slams against Meade for his defensive thinking. Part of that, well, there's some truth to that. He's an engineer. He thinks about defenses. But also think about the impact of the words that his immediate superior, his new superior, General Hallux, will have upon him when he reminds him of his obligation not merely to be the Army of Operation in that area, but also to protect Washington and Baltimore. I want to return to this notion of putting together a team, putting together a staff, because this is one of the elements that speaks to the stability of the Army. How is the organization going to change? Or how is it going to be affected by the arrival of General Meade? Usually when we talk about staff officers in the Army of the Potomac, especially when it concerns Gettysburg, we go straight to this guy. General Dan Butterfield, the Chief of Staff of the Army of the Potomac. He is not a West Point graduate. Most of the other staff officers we will see are graduates of the military academy. He's a New Yorker. He's been active in Democratic politics. That's how he got involved in the military early on. And he and Joseph Hooker are pretty good friends. Now, General Butterfield had a connection with the 5th Corps, and that was Meade's Corps as well. They've had a chance to see each other before. And long before General Meade became commander of the Army and arrives at headquarters and realizes that Dan Butterfield is the Chief of Staff, Meade realizes that he's in an awkward position. The main job of the Chief of Staff is to sort of take the commander's vision. Here's what I want the Army to do. And then sit down and write up the plan, the orders that will make it happen, to translate the idea into action. He's actually not horrible at the job. He can do the job. And he's actually grown into it a good deal. So it's not his competency that Meade is concerned about. If he was concerned about his competency, he would not have made a request when he first arrived at Hooker's tent that, General Butterfield, I need you to stay at least until I can figure out what's going on. In many cases, when a commander left, like when Hooker was about to leave, he might take some of his senior staff officers with him. And there was an assumption that because of the personal relationship between Hooker and Butterfield, that Butterfield will leave. Butterfield will stay. Nobody knows how long, but it's not going to be a comfortable situation. Because Meade has already taken the measure of this man, and he is not comfortable with him. Long before Meade ever knew that he was going to become commander of the Army of the Potomac, he had written in a letter to his wife, I believe that Hooker is a good soldier. The danger he runs is of subjecting himself to bad influences like Dan Butterfield and Dan Sickles, who being intellectually more clever than Hooker and leading him to believe they are very influential, will obtain an injurious ascendancy over him and insensibly affect his conduct. In other words, Meade's not a fan. But we have to deal with it, one way or the other. He's done some interesting things. We know him as the creator of TAPS. He's the man really behind the core badges that Hooker usually gets credit for. What we don't always appreciate is that Hooker, just a couple of days before, the 25th, the 26th, Hooker had sent Butterfield back to Washington, back to Baltimore, basically on a search for more troops. And Hooker had given him very specific orders. When you go and you visit the offices in Washington and in Baltimore and other places, demand to see their books. If they tell you that, oh, we don't have enough soldiers to send you anymore, ask to see the records. And if those numbers seem to be way too high, then call them on it. Well, Butterfield was just the kind of guy to take Hooker at his word, and he had done that. He had pried a few troops loose, but mostly what he did was ruffle a lot of feathers. And he doesn't get a whole lot of satisfaction out of this trip, and he has to report those negative results to Hooker. When Meade shows up with carte blanche to order troops from pretty much anywhere he needs them, except from the Washington defenses, but when he's clearly being given a much freer hand, he's already beginning to snarl just a little bit. It's not going to be a really good match. And in fact, this is the one situation where Meade actually contemplates the possible use of that authority to make changes, to relieve officers. He will actually have a quick discussion with General Warren, his chief engineer, and with General Andrew Atkinson Humphreys, a division commander in the 3rd Corps, about possibly taking over this job. Both men will say, we're in the middle of active operations. We can probably help you more in our current positions. Let's revisit it later. Ultimately, Meade will remove Butterfield from his staff, and not in the far distant future, July 14th. Humphreys will come in and take that slot. But for right here, right now, in those first few days, Butterfield is going to be the chief of staff. He will not cause big troubles for Meade right now. We have to give him credit for that. He will do his job over these last couple days of June. He will, of course, become a major thorn in Meade's side a little bit later, after the battle. But usually when we talk about Meade's transition to command and the staff that he has to work with, mostly this is the one relationship that we talk about. Let's take a look at some of the others he can rely on. He has as a chief engineer, General Warren, he whose statue stands on Little Round Top looking off to the southwest. We know that Warren will serve extremely well here, and Meade is delighted to have him aboard. He had served Hooker as chief engineer. He has some experience up on the Army level. He was a West Pointer, class of 1850, second in his class, graduated and was commissioned at the age of 20. He's an old 5th Corps hand. He's had combat experience. He has the skill set that makes him very, very comfortable in General Meade's eyes. And he will count on him to be a second set of eyes for him on the battlefield. We know how well that works out for him. It's very much a positive. His chief of artillery, Brigadier General Henry Jackson Hunt, West Point, class of 1839. Under General Joseph Hooker, General Hunt had been reduced to what some professional soldiers today refer to as an admin weenie, an administrative guy. Somebody who just becomes the man who counts the cannons and counts the rounds available, really shuffles the paperwork. No operational authority, no command authority out in the field, not in direct command of any troops or anything of the sort. This grated on Hunt. He was never happy with that. At Chancellorsville, he never had a chance to go out and pull together artillery, and when there were opportunities to do something, he always he was always frustrated by that. It opened up opportunities such as that on the 2nd and 3rd at Fairview at Chancellorsville, when a cavalry officer is going to come in and put together an artillery line. There's nothing more gobbling to an artilleryman to see a cavalryman get out ahead of him. And that had happened at Chancellorsville. Meade did not issue a final order that restored Hunt to a more active role in dealing with his artillery. But on the night of July 1st, when they arrive at Gettysburg, Hunt will accompany Meade around the position, and Meade will constantly be talking to him about how to place the artillery, and basically gave him a free hand to do it. Even without the formal authority, Hunt's basically going to say, I accept the initiative to do what needs to be done to win this battle. And Meade never pulled him back in. We know on a number of occasions his intercession probably benefited the Union battle effort pretty well out on the battlefield. We also know that with the lack of any kind of formal authority, he could also get into headbutting contests with folks, as he did with General Hancock on July 3rd. But if you think about how well Hunt will serve Meade at Gettysburg versus how well Pendleton will serve General Lee as artillery chief, this guy figures out what needs to happen, gets it done, and serves well on the staff. Brigadier General Seth Williams. My original idea was to simply have a blank space right there. And it would not have been as a slam to him or as a negative. This is probably the man on the staff who works almost anonymously. You always see his name, but you probably never saw him in person. He's the person who once, it was one of his subordinates who picked out the Lydia Leicester House as the headquarters for the Army of the Potomac. And once he got established there, until the bombardment on the 3rd day, he didn't leave. He's the man who handles the paperwork. Somebody needs to control the paper flow, even in the middle of a battle. And here's your administrative genius who keeps the Army headquarters moving. He's handling the message traffic that comes in from the signals. He's handling all the messages that come in. He gets Meade's words out. He has an awful lot to do with making sure that Army operations move smoothly. He and Meade are personal friends. Probably when Meade has his first meeting with his staff, his biggest smile is going to be seeing Seth Williams in the room. Williams is a West Pointer. He started out as an artilleryman, but right after the Mexican War, he transferred over into the Adjutant General's office, and he had become a specialist in just these kinds of things, keeping the paper flow going. We need orders, we need transfers, we need promotions, we need anything. He's the man in the hour. But like I say, almost invisible. But in this case, invisible is good. It means he's doing his job. Back in a year earlier, when General Meade was wounded at the Battle of Glendale, and they needed to move him out of the way quickly and expeditiously as General McClellan was retreating, changing his base. We needed to give some cover to a wounded officer. Seth Williams had a tent because he was associated with the headquarters. And he waved over the ambulance, actually the wagon that General Meade was being carried in, and said, you rest him down here. There was a bond between these two. Every general likes to have that insider friend in the headquarters and sort of tell you what's going on. For Meade, even before he became commander, it was Seth Williams. This is a relationship that works. Similarly, we have Marvin Patrick, one of General Meade's classmates from West Point, serving as the provost marshal. He's your cop. He's the guy who's responsible for everything from what today we would call force security to just maintaining law and order. On the march northward, especially as the Army is around Frederick, Maryland, probably not as a result of the change of command, but the Army was moving north so quickly that an awful lot of soldiers were falling out of ranks. And they were going into Frederick, and they were visiting all of Frederick's finer liquor establishments and the not so finer liquor establishments, and anywhere they could find liquor. And apparently, as General Slocum said as his 12th Corps came through, General Meade, there are soldiers from every Army Corps and the cavalry back in that town carrying it up. This is horrible, it's unprofessional, you gotta do something about it. It didn't help when the mayor of Frederick sent the exact same message. Patrick is the man who is going to go and take care of these kinds of issues. He's always on the lookout for security issues. He's one of the people who's very concerned about the impact of Stuart's Ride around Hooker's Army. He's worried about the break in communications between the Army of the Potomac and Washington. He's always on the lookout for those Southern operatives who might be looking to take advantage of vulnerabilities. And he's going to do his job very well. He is also, by a number of accounts, one of the scariest men in the Union Army. He says he's very humorless. He has a great beard. He insisted that his staff members attend church services with him on Sunday mornings. There were officers who tried not to get staff duty with him. He's a real interesting character, but he was quite effective in his efforts. Part of the Provost Marshal's office was a new organization within the Army of the Potomac called the Military Information Division. We have Major George Sharp. By the time of the Battle of Gettysburg, he's been promoted to colonel. And he's the one who will become the head of Hooker's Military Information Division. Whenever we watch the movie Gettysburg, let's ask the question, how many of you have seen the movie Gettysburg? There are some questions that are real easy to ask in a movie like this. The opening scenes, Harrison. So we all have this notion of the Confederate Harrison out there being the spy who locates. The flip side of the story is that there are Union Harrisons out there doing the same thing, trying to find the Confederates. We don't often hear about them. But this is the man who is their boss. Colonel Sharp is going to have a number of men working for him, wearing civilian clothes, who are going to be out forward in places like Gettysburg, who are going to be out looking and trying to find where Lee's army is, how big the various detachments are, what their intentions might be, where they're moving. One of the things that General Meade found sort of at the top of his heaping plate was, I don't know where my army is. He was able to figure that out pretty quickly. But then his second question is, I don't know where Lee is. And he's going to start asking a lot of questions. His cavalry can only provide some of the answers. He's on northern soil, so he's hoping that he's going to get a lot of intelligence from newspapers and that sort of thing. But he finds out something important. Southern Pennsylvania has never seen an invasion before. They don't have any base of experience on which to judge what it is they're seeing. A group of soldiers come through, and one report says there were at least 1,500 of them. And then the next report reports 10,000. Is it 1,500 or is it 10,000? It only took Meade about a day and a half for him to express his frustration that information from newspaper and from civilians in South Central Pennsylvania was utterly worthless. And what he really needed were better eyes on the ground. On the 29th of June, an order will come from Meade through Butterfield for Sharp to send out his scouts. And it's interesting where he says, send out your scouts. It's not just up toward Harrisburg. It's to Hanover, which is, of course, east of here, to Greencastle, which is quite a bit west of here, to Chambersburg, west of here, and to Gettysburg and northward, if possible. General Meade still does not quite have a fix on where Lee is, and is actually sending out Sharp scouts in all directions to get that information. One of the things that we learn as we are watching Meade try to get this information is that he's not getting a lot of information from places where he thought he might be getting it. For a while, telegraphic contact with Washington was cut off, and so a lot of information he thought would be fed to him from the War Department, from Hallux, was not getting through. He's really working in a bit of an informational vacuum for a while. He never knows when he can rely upon communications and that kind of thing. Well, it's important for General Meade to be able to figure this stuff out. And Sharp is going to be one of the factors that we don't really think about very much. When General Porter created the Military Information Division, he created it as an Army-level asset. The Corps commanders, including Meade, knew that Sharp and his office existed, but they didn't know that much about its working, what it could do, or anything of the sort. The closest student of Sharp, the Military Information Division, and their activities said that Meade was an incredibly fast learner, that he picked up on its utility very quickly, and that was a great thing. Brigadier General Rufus Ingalls, one of the true unsung heroes of the Army of the Potomac throughout its entire history. West Point graduate, class of 43. Very early on in his career, he committed himself to staff operations in the Quartermaster's Bureau, and he became an expert. He served as the chief quartermaster for every commander in the Army, from McClellan through Grant. That is impressive. He's the man who has to think about moving all the supplies, all the ammunition, everything that the Army needs, moving it to where you need it, when it needs to be there. The man is just really good at it. As soon as he finds out that General Meade is in command, he will send back a message to his boss in Washington, D.C., General Montgomery Meigs. The opening sentence tells you everything about this man's professional mindset and tells you an awful lot about why he is so successful. The first couple lines: General Meade is in command. The Army has confidence in him. We must all support him. All you need to know about this man. He's also really good at his job. General Meade will say, we might have to move forward very, very quickly. So General Ingalls, I want you to prioritize our logistical effort in this way. The ammunition goes first. The ambulances go second. Supplies will have to wait. They go third. We have to set our priorities. General Ingalls will salute, and he will do as Meade asks, with one specific exception. Having worked with the Army for a long time, having been in this role during the Maryland campaign in '62, he knows that an awful lot of the roads in Maryland are macadamized. They are basically asphalted. They tear up shoes when you march on them. Shoes were always a problem for both armies, but Ingalls knew that his men, the Union soldiers, were going to need more shoes. In the same letter where he says, we must support General Meade, the other thing he says is, send me 10,000 pairs of shoes and 10,000 pairs of socks. I'm going to deliver them to the troops on the road as they need them. For some of you who are who do logistics in your real job when you're away from here, you know that there is a concept called just-in-time logistics, where you get your supplies, where you can issue them, where you don't have to worry about storing them or anything else. The need and the supply meet at the same time. Meigs will respond by sending forward the shoes and the socks. And literally there would be some of Ingalls' wagons at various points along the roads north, where there would just be some of his soldiers standing there throwing out pairs of shoes, throwing out pairs of socks to the men who needed it. He carried out Meade's orders, but he also understood some of those little bits and pieces that he could take care of without bothering Meade about it, and he got it done. If you take a look at these General Meade's key staff officers, realize how professionally competent and the good character of most of these gentlemen, you can begin to appreciate one benefit that Meade inherited that we don't often talk about. He actually inherited a pretty good organization. and he was able to work with it and make things happen. That was a boon to him. There were other things that Meade had to think about, and that, of course, is the fact that he is not the senior general in the Army when he gets this appointment. We know that General Reynolds, if he was not offered the command, at least a few feelers went out earlier in June about being a possible successor to Hooker, and he had said he was not interested. We have General Sedgwick, we have General Slocum. Sedgwick and Slocum were never apparently offered a chance to, they were never proffered command of the Army. They were mostly proffered a note saying, you will take orders from this guy, or we'll find another job for you. So they're here. The reason to take a look at them is simply because General Meade appreciates he has to deal with these men sensitively. They are, after all, his superiors by date of rank. But also he has to treat them as brothers in arms for another specific reason. Every good organization has to keep in mind a succession plan. If something happens to the top guy, who's next in line? If something happened to Robert E. Lee, it's pretty clear that James Longstreet is the next one in line. If something happens to General Meade, who's next in line? Probably they haven't thought about that a whole lot. Well, I'm hearing some good answers out here. It might have been Reynolds at first, but Reynolds dies very quickly. So it's going to have to be Slocum or Sedgwick. How many vote for Slocum? Why? How many of you vote for Sedgwick? Okay, the interesting thing was, and trust me, this is something that didn't occur to me until relatively recently. The first thing you do is you go after their dates of commission. Both Slocum and Sedgwick became major generals on the exact same day. Okay, what do you do then? You go back to their brigadier general commissions. In that case, they were commissioned brigadier general in the same month, but Slocum got his 2 weeks earlier. So if something happens to me, and with Reynolds out of the picture, Slocum is the next guy up. You have to find a way to deal with these guys so that if something happens to me, they're read in on things. So it's not just simply being sensitive to their feelings that they got passed over. There might come a situation fairly soon when one of you guys has to step up. So there's a little bit more to thinking about here than just simply wounded sentiments. Whenever we think about Robert E. Lee, and we talk about the Army of Northern Virginia coming here to Pennsylvania, we always talk about how he's had to reorganize his army, and he has 2 new corps commanders to deal with. And we talk about A.P. Hill and Richard Buell, and we talk about that all the time, and we never mention the same thing in connection with the Union Army. We should. Not only do we have a new commanding officer, but we have some major internal changes there as well. For starters, well, General Meade has never been an Army commander, so everybody has to get used to him in that role. Meade, at least, is used to a number of his corps commanders and has seen them in action as peers, like Slocum and Sedgwick and Howard and Sickles and Reynolds. But he also has some new people who he has not yet had a chance to take their measure. He has a new cavalry commander. Back during Chancellorsville, George Stoneman commanded the Army of the Potomac's cavalry, but he was relieved shortly after the campaign, and Major General Alfred Pleasanton is now in charge. Pleasanton is the man who claimed that he put together the great artillery line at Chancellorsville. He was the cavalryman who General Hunt probably really got irritated by. Alfred Pleasanton really likes the media. He likes to curry favor with them. He never saw an article in the newspaper about him he didn't like, and he tried to make sure that there were lots of articles in the newspaper about him. General Meade, what he knows about him is not very much, and it's not very positive. You keep him on a fairly short leash. Here at Gettysburg, we hear about the division commanders in the Army of the Potomac's cavalry: Buford, Gregg, Kilpatrick. What we don't hear a whole lot about is Pleasanton himself. There's reasons for that. General George Sykes, when Meade becomes commander of the Army, he has promoted General George Sykes, one of his division commanders, to take over the 5th Corps. Sykes' nickname is Tardy George. That might raise a certain amount of concern. It's just an interesting thing, but at least Meade knows this man. The third one is the one that oftentimes takes us a bit by surprise. It's hard to think that Gettysburg is the first battle in which Winfield Scott Hancock is a corps commander. He did not take over 2nd Corps until Dry's Couch left the Army on the 9th of June. At Gettysburg, Hancock has only commanded his corps for 3 weeks. So factor that in when you're thinking about it. Meade has a very positive opinion of General Hancock, as we well know, but it's not based on his performance as a corps commander. That still has to be measured. Fortunately, it turns out pretty well. These ideas, these changes in the Army of the Potomac are not just related to personnel. There are other things going on in the Army that General Meade has to get spun up on really, really quickly. The cavalry not only has a new commander, but it's being reorganized. A new 3rd Division is just being organized. That's Kilpatrick's division. And remember, this is the time when those 3 baby brigadiers are being appointed. Farnsworth, Merritt, and that other guy. So there's some organizational changes going on in this cavalry. We have some new organizations that are just now joining the Army and haven't really been assigned to commands yet. Lockwood's brigade coming out of the Baltimore area that will end up with the 12th Corps. Stanton's Vermonters joining the 1st Corps for their one and only battle. General Meade will take the engineering train, the pontoons, and order it to return back to Washington. There is an engineer monument on this battlefield to a unit that wasn't actually present here. But that was a change in, we're moving troops around. Probably one of the biggest changes that we don't talk about very much is the departure very recently, since Chancellorsville, of literally thousands of soldiers who had enlisted in units that served for only 2 years. All of us who've read The Killer Angels or watched the Gettysburg movie know the story of the 2nd Maine men who did not get to go home when the 2nd Maine went home and then ended up in the 20th Maine. That was not a unique circumstance in the 20th Maine's history. It was happening in regiments all around the Army. Back during the Battle of Chancellorsville, the 3rd Corps had 3 divisions. Here at Gettysburg, it has only 2. One of the reasons being an awful lot of 2-year regiments have been in the old 3rd Corps, and they're now gone. There's an awful lot of changes going on in this Army that Meade has to bring himself up to speed on in just a very short time. There are 2 other things that are important to point out about what's on General Meade's plate. One is a new set of relationships. Along with his new responsibilities in Army Command, he's going to have to forge new relationships with these folks. Commander of the Army, Henry Hallux, Secretary of War Stanton, President Lincoln himself. As I noted earlier, he doesn't have time for sit-down, heart-to-heart meetings with any of these guys. But on the job, he's going to have to forge the beginnings of his relationship. We know that Hallux will be sending him all kinds of comments and suggestions, and he's going to try to be as helpful as he possibly can. Perhaps what we have to appreciate are the things that Stanton and Lincoln will do. They will actually shield General Meade. They will try to make sure that his plate doesn't completely overflow by not forwarding to him some of the other concerns that land on their desk. Such things as frequent requests coming out of southern Pennsylvania and even New Jersey to basically saying, you put the wrong Pennsylvanian in command. It should not be General Meade. Was there ever a time to bring George McClellan back and put him in command of the Army? The number of telegrams and letters that Lincoln got in those last couple of days of June calling for McClellan's return are pretty amazing. One of them came from the governor of New Jersey, who kept on saying, if Lee crosses the Susquehanna, clearly his objective will be Trenton. New Jersey might be stronger than the storm, but apparently it wasn't stronger than the fears of Robert E. Lee. But basically, Abraham Lincoln sends back one of those wonderfully worded notes saying, I really think Lee is probably heading somewhere else, and New Jersey can probably breathe easy on this one. There will be a lot of requests from other generals in Baltimore, in other areas, General Dix down around Fort Monroe, all kinds of other things of a military nature going on the periphery of Meade's operations that Lincoln or Stanton will handle themselves without making it too difficult on General Meade himself. It's very interesting to see how this works. And he will get an ally. His ally is General Couch. They had been corps commanders together. Couch is now commander of the Army of the Susquehanna. We don't usually talk an awful lot about General Couch, and we probably need to talk a little bit more about him in our future considerations about the battle. Halleck had made it clear to Couch that he was to take orders. He was not merely to cooperate with Meade, but he was subordinate to Meade in this situation. From even before the 1st of July, even before the battle starts, Couch will embrace this opportunity. He will become an extra reliable, responsible source of information. He will constantly be feeding into General Meade anything he can find out about Lee reconcentrating his army, and especially when this battle is over and when more manpower is needed to help in the pursuit, it's going to be Couch, more than anybody in Washington, who will start throwing troops out there to try to help things happen. All these things together speak to a healthy organization. It speaks to a healthy professional mindset among most of the officers in the Army of the Potomac and the immediate periphery. And it helps General Meade do something that is very, very important. It allows him to remain on task. Even when he's trying to figure out which tent which staff officer is staying in, he is still able to remember that he needs to focus on Lee ahead of him and the defense of Washington and Baltimore behind him. He is able to come up with various ideas. He keeps his army in motion. He does not stop. Usually, a change of command dictates a stop, as there's a shifting of gears. With Meade, in the transition, the army didn't stop. The campaign continued. And with all that in mind, there's a whole different thing to talk about when Meade is after the battle, but if you have to take a look at the 3 days leading up to the battle, from the time he took command until he arrives on the battlefield, the man earns his paycheck, and he has an awful lot of help in doing so. For all we have to say about Hooker and McClellan and all those predecessors, the army that George Meade inherits works. And that set up a victory at Gettysburg as much as a whole lot of other things that happened on this battlefield. Thank you. We have time for a couple of questions. Literally, whenever I get started talking about Meade, people just want, or I just but I'm allowed to answer a couple of questions. So please come up to the mic and hit me with something. Yes, sir.
I'm Dick Sanders from Nashville, Tennessee. Question about Meade and Lincoln's selection of him. Obviously, what did Lincoln know about Meade? There are so many predecessors, as you said, that didn't find success, and there's yet another one. Why Meade?
Why Meade? That's a question we would love to have more information on, but the best explanation seemed to be Hooker was having a discussion back in about March with Abraham Lincoln, and they had a general discussion about the qualities of corps commanders, and Hooker apparently said, Meade's not a bad guy. But they weren't talking about a succession plan or anything of the sort. They were just talking about who was measuring up and who was not, and Meade came up on top, and came up pretty close. If you take a look at it, though, who would have been ahead of him? Somebody like Reynolds, the story on exactly what happened there, whether he was offered it or whether they just kind of fell him out a little bit or something like that, the story gets better in the retelling after he's killed. So it's always kind of hard to find out exactly what happened there, but possibly a viable candidate. Couch was considered a possible candidate as well, but he took himself out of that when he said, I can't serve with Hooker anymore, and he's already up here in the Department of Susquehanna when the decision has to be made. General Sedgwick, for as much as he's a good guy and Uncle John and all that kind of stuff, he doesn't have the kind of offensive spirit that Lincoln is looking for. Lincoln has seen him, if we think about what he did at Chancellorsville and how he doesn't move very quickly. He's fighting the Salem Church part of the battle. You know, he doesn't seem to be moving all that quickly or aggressively. He's stout in defense, but he doesn't have quite the spirit. Slocum has some of the same issues with him. Howard, well, Chancellorsville. There's your answer there. Sickles. Nobody's going that way. So who are you left with? Me. So, boy, that makes it sound like he's the best of the bad lot. But I don't think it is. I think that to the extent that there was buzz, okay, who's not just available, but who's available and good. That's who you're going to get to. But we don't have a paper trail. We don't have any paragraph, annual evaluations, anything like that that says if something happens to Hooker, this is the guy you need to look at. There's wonderful holes in history, in the historical record, that just drive us all crazy. Yes, sir.
Dave Thompson, Athens, Georgia. You mentioned the person right now I want to ask you about, and that's Howard. Obviously, we know what Meade thinks of him by July 1, when he frantically sends Hancock up to kind of take control of the field. Any sense of how he feels about Howard from that June 28 to June 30 period, or is he just trying to figure out what's going on in his own life?
I think he's really looking to assert some control personally over the battlefield. He had Reynolds up there. Reynolds he trusts. They had a long history in the Pennsylvania Reserves together. They knew each other. That's okay. Meade and Howard don't know each other all that well. They're also very different people. I don't know what he felt about Howard personally, but this could be a case where it would be easy to perceive that Meade distrusts Howard, and that's why he sent Hancock up. But it could just simply be, I need to assert some control over this fight. I trust Hancock. I've told Hancock is very clear on what I am thinking right now. Howard's been on the battlefield for a number of hours, while Meade's been back in Huntingtown getting information in. And there's been no opportunity for Meade and Howard to talk to each other, but Hancock is there. So Meade and Hancock talk, and when the time comes, okay, General Hancock, you know what it is I want to do. Is it clear in your mind? Do you understand my intent? Yes. Okay. And here's your permission slip that lets you take control over everything. So I don't think it's so much a slam on Howard. It's just simply a way to assert some control through the eyes of somebody who you know knows what you want to have happen. Okay, we get one more, and we'll do that.
Yeah, 2 questions.
No, you get one. I'm told here, one.
Let's talk about the Council of War, which, given the setup of the Corps commanders, I mean, to a large degree, there are a lot of historians who have actually said fairly recently that the Council of War on the night of July 2nd was just a cover in case Meade wanted to retreat or showed that he didn't know what he was doing, or that, and they viewed that Council of War as a form of weakness. But there are more recent historians who have said they're doing it in order so we understand what's going on because of new to command. So given your review of the relationship with the other Corps commanders, what do you think about the Council of War? How do you perceive that was?
My views on the Council of War. Where do we get most of our understanding about what happened at the Council of War? Dan Butterfield. Dan the man. Now that right there should put all the red lights flashing right there, okay? Dan the man wants you to believe that that's exactly what Meade was wanting to do. But there are other accounts. If you take Dan the man's account and throw it up against John Gibbon's account, there's a whole different tone in all this. And if you take a look in the bits and pieces, especially to see how Meade is handling all this, I don't think that well, first of all, he doesn't have to ask permission, okay? He doesn't need anybody's blessing or anything of the sort. If you take a look back at Chancellorsville, General Hooker called a bunch of his generals together, and some of them want to fight and some of them don't want to fight and all that sort of thing. When it's done, he goes, well, we're not fighting. And the majority have been to stay and fight and keep it on, keep going, but when everybody left the room, they're griping and complaining. If he already knew what he wanted to do, why did he call us all together? The majority vote had been to stay and fight. Hooker decided to leave. When Hooker gave the order to leave, everybody saluted and left. That's what an army does. Meade doesn't need anybody's permission. If he wants to leave, if he wants to move the army back, he can do it. I would suggest that there's a different reason why he's calling everybody together, and that is he's had some very big changes in the army. Reynolds is dead. Newton's a new guy. You have Sickles down. You have Hancock covering 2. You have Birney in the room for the first time. You have that weird 12th Corps thing going on where both Alpheus Williams and Slocum's there. You have a lot of, you have some weird dynamics going on. At this point, General Meade needs to sit down, and anybody who deals with leadership on almost any kind of level of organization knows that there's a point in time when you need to go up to your senior people and just look them in the eye and get an idea of, is their head still in the game? Or that you don't care if they're with you or against you. Can they do the job if called upon is the bigger question. General Gibbon is not somebody who Meade knows really, really, really well, knows him somewhat and all that sort of thing, but remember the question that he asked. General Meade goes up and says, General Gibbon, General Lee attacks tomorrow, it's in your front. And General Gibbon goes, well, if he happens, I'll be ready for him. If General Gibbon's answer would have been, oh my God, no, can you send me reinforcements and go strengthen the line? I want to know that about General Gibbon tonight and not tomorrow when things might be bad. There's a lot of reasons why General Gibbon probably called the senior people together, or why General Meade called the senior people together. And getting permission is not high on my list.
We have 10 minutes before Jeffrey Work will be speaking about James Longstreet.